breeze. Fairly brisk wind for the north of Scotland, for the North Sea coast as well. It will continue to bring showers in overnights, but mostly these will be affecting northern and eastern coasts. Elsewhere, it's largely clear skies, and under those clear skies, with winds moderating a little, temperatures will fall away. What a chilly night in places. Main urban areas 5 or 6 Celsius. In sheltered spots 2 to 4 Celsius, perhaps even a touch of frost for some sheltered parts of Scotland. But despite the chill, it's a bright start out there this weekend with sunny spells for many at first. There will be additional cloud for the north of Scotland as well as the east of England, and here we will see 1 or 2 further showers, but they'll be fewer compared with Friday, and elsewhere it will largely be dry with some sunshine. Temperatures reaching 19 Celsius, I'd say the warm spot likely somewhere around Cardiff. Mid-teens for many, however, and under those clear skies once again, temperatures will fall away on Saturday night. So another chilly night, not quite as chilly. Temperatures most places holding up in the mid-single figures, perhaps even 9 or 10 Celsius in places. And there'll be a bit more cloud coming in to the north and northwest, and a few showers for western Scotland as we start off Sunday. But Sunday, once again, is mostly dry. There will be some sunny spells out there, but I think a bit more cloud compared with Saturday, and a few showers drifting from the west of Scotland into northern England and central parts. Monday and Tuesday sees more cloud, but also a touch warmer.
Hello there, it's just gone 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry, and it's the penultimate day of full royal focus on my show. And today we've seen the King and Queen Consort in Wales and queues to see Queen Elizabeth II lie in state. Get this, if you join the queue at this moment, you look likely to have a 24-hour wait. Goodness me, well, you could be stood next to some interesting people, though, because today in the queue, none other than David Beckham. I'll be getting into all of that and more in just a few moments with the historian David Starkey and Jack Sellers, who's a former special advisor to the Secretary of State for Wales. But first, let's bring ourselves up to speed with the latest news headlines.
Good evening, it's 2 minutes past 6. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. King Charles III and the Queen Consort Camilla have returned to Buckingham Palace this afternoon. It follows their visit to Wales, the King's first to the nation as monarch. Thousands of well-wishers lined the streets of Cardiff to catch a glimpse of the both of them. The trip is the final part of his tour of the Four Nations as king. At the Welsh Parliament, he received a motion of condolence and spoke of his mother's love for the country. The king said Wales has held a special place in his mother's heart. Later this evening at 7:30, the King, the Princess Royal and the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex will hold a 15-minute vigil at the late Queen's coffin. It's expected 8 of the Queen's grandchildren will hold a vigil tomorrow, and GB News understands the Duke of Sussex will be permitted to wear his military uniform at the King's request. The Prince and Princess of Wales have met with Commonwealth troops at the Army Training Centre Purbright. The troops have been deployed to assist in the Queen's funeral on Monday. The royals met with senior representatives from Canada, Australia and New Zealand to thank them for their assistance. The queue for those waiting to pay their respects to Her Majesty has officially reopened after a government announcement that it had been paused earlier on. Well, these are now live images inside Westminster Hall. The steady flow of people continues to move past the Queen lying in state. Southwark Park, which marked the end of the queue, had reached capacity this morning. The government is warning the wait time is around 24 hours now, with the queue nearly 5 miles long. But those still waiting remain in good spirits.
I was surprised how much losing her has actually affected me. I was here with my family back for the Diamond Jubilee, seeing the barges go past, and just wanted to come and pay my respects and thank her for all her service.
I didn't know I was going to come, but having watched it over and over on TV, and I felt like this is the right thing to do.
Queen was the only stable thing that kept world spinning and going on, and it was hard loss, and we felt it everywhere. So for me it was very important to be with British people, to share it.
I've also come to just finish off something that I started in 1977. I wrote to Her Majesty and invited her to tea. Well, I got a letter from her, a lady in waiting. The Queen commanded her to write, "Thank you for my letter," but said unfortunately she couldn't attend. I forgave her at that time and I forgive her now.
Well, among those queuing for hours to pay their respects to Her Majesty was former England footballer David Beckham. Beckham, who was awarded an OBE by the Queen. Visibly teary-eyed, he bowed his head slowly to the late Queen's coffin inside Westminster Hall. The late Queen's funeral next week has been described as the largest single policing event ever for the Metropolitan Police. Officers from almost every force across the country have been drafted in to help with the service at Westminster Abbey in London. Almost 200 everyday heroes will join the royals and world leaders at the funeral, including key workers, NHS staff and volunteers. A number of cathedrals across the country will be showing live coverage of the service, which starts at 11 a.m. Investigators looking into police conduct following the fatal shooting of a 24-year-old man say they'll examine whether race was a factor in the incident. Chris Carber was shot in South London on the 5th of September by a Met Police officer. The Independent Office for Police Conduct issued an update this afternoon saying they're working hard to gather and review evidence. Authorities in Ukraine investigating evidence of a mass grave near the eastern city of Izium say most of the people buried there are civilians. A warning some viewers may find the following images distressing. The city in the Kharkiv region has recently been liberated after 6 months of Russian occupation. The UN Human Rights Office is planning a trip to verify claims that at least 450 bodies are buried there. The Kremlin is denying targeting civilians or committing war crimes. But President Zelensky says an investigation is underway with international assistance and that there is evidence of Russian war crimes in those areas.
Unfortunately, this looks like a bloody soap opera. After Bucha, we're seeing similar sights in deoccupied regions of our country. In Izium, we found 450 dead people buried. But there are others, separate burials of many people, tortured people, entire families in certain areas.
TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Dewbs & Co.
I'll be with you until 7 o'clock this evening, and keeping me company tonight is Jack Sellers, who's the former Special Advisor to the Secretary of State for Wales. And he also had the same role with Boris Johnson. Also alongside me is the historian and broadcaster, David Starkey. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome.
Evening.
And also, it's very important to me to involve you in the conversation this evening. I want to know your thoughts, your stories, your memories, your reflections. You can get in touch with me, GBViews at gbnews.uk is my email, or you can tweet me at GBNews. Throughout the programme, I'll be sharing some of your memories that you've shared with us of you meeting the late Queen. Now, I spent a lot of yesterday's show, didn't I, talking about the huge queue of people waiting to see the Queen lying in state. Would you believe it's got even longer than it was then? Now, if you were to join the queue right now as I speak, you'll be waiting for more than 24 hours potentially before you manage to pay your respects. Our reporter, Alice Porter, is live there at Lambeth Bridge. Alice, good evening to you. Another day of queuing, and it will continue.
It really will. I have to say, I think everybody in the queue has got rather good at queuing. A lot of people have come prepared with bags of sweeties and goodies. I saw some ladies earlier having a few GNTs as well to pass the time. But here at Lambeth Bridge, they are very much on the home straight because Westminster Hall is just over there, and they will be able to be there. Hopefully, it looks quite close, but I still think there are a couple of hours to go. But they are on the home straight after potentially 12 hours of queuing. Would you believe it here? You can hear from the celebration of people that they're almost here. Excuse me, ladies. How are you finding it? You're almost there.
We're almost there, nearly there.
Song, isn't it? How's the day been going?
Quite long, but we're in good spirits.
Now, you've been in good company because David Beckham has been in the queue today. Did you hear about that?
Missed him, yeah.
Oh, shame. What did you think about having someone like him in the queue for so long?
Well, it would have been nice if he was with us. That would have been great. Could have told my nephew that.
Bye-bye, I don't want to steal your place. Well, there you go. I think a lot of people who have been so excited to be here all day. It's been hard work, though, but I think it does help that perhaps somebody, a familiar face, perhaps, knowing that he was in the crowd, doing his time in queuing, just like everybody else here.
So I shall leave you to your position and you're talking to people. I found it extraordinary, I have to say. You know, it is a queue, of course, to go and pay your respects to somebody, a much loved person, of course, who has sadly passed away. But one of the reflections that I certainly took away from my time down there in the queue was it was a pleasant atmosphere. People from all walks of life, different ages, different races, different nationalities, backgrounds, you name it. So many people had come from far and wide, all come together, making friends and making memories for life. So, of course, an incredibly sad occasion, but one that I know has also brought new friends, perhaps, to people, and, you know, some happiness among some quite dark days that we've experienced in this country. But David Starkey, forming queues like this, trying to pay respects to people laying in state in Westminster Hall, this isn't new. This has gone on for generations, hasn't it?
A few generations. Remember, we didn't used to be good at queuing. We didn't used to be an orderly people. We were famous for rioting and cutting kings' heads off. And things settled down extraordinary in the processes of civilization of the 19th century, of industrial society, of social discipline, of a monarchy that becomes representative, all of these things, proper patterns of local government and welfare and so on. And clearly, the British queue is slightly a myth. It's, of course, ingrained in us by the Second World War and the rationing that continues beyond that. But yes, I mean, the lying in state is, I think everybody is now beginning to get this. Victoria does not lie in state. The first lying in state in Westminster Hall, royal lying in state, because there'd been a prime ministerial one for the great Victorian Prime Minister Gladstone in 1898, is the man who'd actually stood, is for the man who'd actually paid honour to him in just the same way that the princes are going to do to Her late Majesty today. And that was the then Prince of Wales, who becomes Edward VII. And when he dies in 1910, he gets the first lying in state. And he also establishes the record until now for the number of people. It's somewhere in the high 300,000s, right. You know, sort of 370, 400,000. But it looks to me, again, I haven't seen the figures. You were telling me before we went on air that the estimate is something of the order
about 750,
three quarters of a million. So you're looking at whatever it is, almost doubling.
Yeah,
you're looking, in fact, you are looking at doubling.
Yeah, and it's quite fascinating. I have to say, Jack, I'm a little bit disappointed with myself. I'm kicking myself because a couple of days ago I was down at the queue. It was 2 miles long, and I thought to myself, shall I come back after work, or, you know, what shall I do? And I didn't do it. And now, when I hear about queues that are 4 or 5 miles long, 24-hour waiting, I think, oh, I missed my opportunity. Did you go? Are you going to go?
No, I haven't been down, unfortunately, just haven't had the opportunity to go down. But everything I've heard from people and I see on Twitter, and you see, it's funny, everyone's obsessing with, queues themselves are a very British thing, but I love the fact that the media themselves are absolutely obsessed with the queue, and you wake up every morning and the media are doing different stories on how long it is.
There's nothing else to report.
Yeah.
It has been the thing, hasn't it, with this whole event? It's been very carefully calculated that it's been calculated for this. It's been calculated for rolling news. There is a news story, and the story at the moment is the queue. How big is it? Has it got... You can practically see there's been a race. When will it get to Southwark? When will the park be full? It's... I think there's been a measure of very shrewd news management as well as genuine feeling. And I think it's the two that have worked together.
Indeed.
But this is the first that, I'm late 20s now, first time I've ever seen anything like this. I imagine, David can correct me on this, but I imagine last time something on this scale, not as big as this, but maybe Winston Churchill's state funeral.
The Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
Or the Queen Mother's, really, which I was...
just 200,000 for that. And again, I didn't go to that, but my late partner, a young man, he would have been then about, he would have been then in his mid-30s, went out of the sort of things you've been talking about. Partly respect, partly curiosity, let's face it, but partly also an experience. And this seems to me to be the thing that's most coloured people's reactions in all of this. This has now become a great experience, a memory that will be epoch-making in people's lives.
Yeah, because I described my experience down the queue. I said I quite enjoyed it. And then someone pointed out to me, Michelle, you're referring to someone that's died. I'm not sure you should be saying that you've enjoyed it. And I said, I get your point, and maybe my terminology was wrong, but I stand by my sentiment because my experience of queuing alongside people, talking to people, it was jovial, it was pleasant, it was upbeat, it was nice, it was friendly, it was an enjoyable experience, albeit due to unpleasant circumstances.
Yeah, and going back to what you said earlier about the length now and you having your regret about how actually long the queue has got, but everything I see at the moment and hear feedback from different people is that no matter how long the queue, they always come out of it at the other end with no regrets whatsoever that they spent their whole evening or their whole night standing in that queue. They find it very poignant, and they're glad that they're there for this historic moment to get the memory, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing, really.
Yeah, unless, of course, you're someone like an MP or someone like that who doesn't have to queue. What do you make to that? You've been advising people formerly, MPs, etc. Would you have advised someone to take advantage of their queue-jumping ability, or would you advise them to get in the queue a la Beckham, or...?
I like to think, and maybe I've given myself too much compliments here, I like to think that, you look at David Beckham today, and Susanna Reid, by the way, was another one, I believe, who actually did do the queue. I see Holly and Phil, Holly Willoughby and Philip Schofield have come under a bit of flack for jumping the queue. But in terms of how I would advise the Member of Parliament, yeah, I think absolutely getting
There's
getting
David Beckham on the screen. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just pointing out David Beckham on the screen, mainly because I want to look at him myself. not going to lie.
Yeah. Is lust entirely appropriate in the middle of this? But can I put the other argument? When the Prince of Wales gave his first speech on becoming king, he emphasised one thing absolutely fundamentally that you, Jack, will know about. This is a parliamentary monarchy. Members of Parliament have a wholly special part in this. You're presenting this as simply personal queue jumping. They are there as the representatives of the whole realm. And I think it... Now, I take Jack's PR point. The PR point is absolutely right. You should have seen them there, cabinet ministers and the lot, because do you know what? They would have got the same kind of flattering coverage that Beckham did. Weren't they fools not to get it? But if you think of the way the state works, the place of Parliament, it's appropriate.
Yeah, but then for me, it's about the extension of guest passes. So it's not just the parliamentarian. You've got to think it's about 4 guest passes per person. And it's that, for me, that makes me slightly uncomfortable. And also, if I was a serving Member of Parliament, I would want the experience, because part of this is an experience, and it's not just about going to pay respects at the coffin per se. For me, anyway, it wouldn't be. It is about that experience, a shared experience, queuing, being part of end to end, the whole thing.
Yeah, but there's an alternative spin on the, also, again, going back to sort of what David was saying, on the extra 4 tickets. You know, one way I imagine this was envisaged to be used was not for members of Parliament necessarily to invite their friends or their family, but maybe this was an opportunity for them to invite specific people from their constituencies who necessarily couldn't do the queue. Someone very elderly who couldn't stand up overnight and stand for 12 hours in the night, or someone who's been particularly, you know, got a great record of service in the community, who's recognised and well-renowned. You know, that could have been a very nice way to pay tribute to them and to what they've done by bringing those people in.
Yeah, the ones I saw haven't done that. The ones I've seen have taken their children along with them, or, I don't know, spouses or whatever. But, you know, we can agree to disagree. We don't all have to agree, do we? But you tell me, what do you think?
That's called freedom.
Indeed it is. And actually, I would hope that we have a nice legacy off this, because you and I spoke earlier on, David, one of the things for me that I hope happens, because let's face it, things haven't been great in this country. Well, they haven't been great globally, let's be honest. And we've been a very divided, often unpleasant society. And one of the things that I hope good can come from this unfortunate situation of a passing is that maybe we do have unity going forward. Maybe we do have niceness going forward.
I don't want unity, because I think there are issues that properly divide us. This is what a democracy is about. There isn't a single way. There are not single solutions to the economic crises, the social crises, the crises of immigration that we face. The one thing that I do hope for is a higher measure of civility in the way the debates are conducted. That's the important thing. There's been a terrible division, and there's been a tendency to go backwards in time. Which, again, I'm now going to say something that is probably very contentious. I think the decision of the Commons Privilege Committee to continue sitting, as it were, in judgment on the late Prime Minister, the former, not yet late, the former Prime Minister, is completely wrong. He has been punished politically by the loss of office. There should be no further punishment. We grew out of the notion that political failure has got to be punished in the 18th century. The last fallen minister to be sent to the Tower and threatened with death was the Earl of Oxford at the very beginning of the 18th century. We don't want to start going backwards. We don't want to do what the Americans are doing between Trump and Biden, effectively accusing each other of treason.
Yeah, well,
and you know, our politics has got so polarised that that kind of language is edging in. It needs to stop.
It does. I mean, we say that that kind of language is edging in. I would say that often it's some of the politicians themselves that are responsible for that kind of language. But, you know, I can save that, I guess, for another day. But one of the nice things, Jack, about the monarchy, one of the positives, is that it does kind of, it's a layer over political divides. It's almost neutral. And that, for me, is why I'm hoping it is an opportunity to turn a corner and be more pleasant to each other. Because I take David's point, we don't have to have unity in a single viewpoint, but just some respectful disagreement is what we've been lacking.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, especially, you know, this has been the sort of build-up since 2016, and that's not a fault of Brexit or the Brexit referendum. That's just a fault of the arguments on either side. Some people not being able to accept it, some people going too far on the one side. But no, I completely agree on that point. But going back to what you said about the monarchy transcending all this, yeah, I completely agree. It's not the monarchy, just like, and this is something going back to when I used to work in government. You know, one of my primary focuses was the union and how we can strengthen the union and really, you know, get a hone in from UK government, so it's very active in Wales, Scotland. The one thing I found tricky to overcome was that the union, and sometimes people see the monarchy as a conservative value, when we all know it's not. You know, the Labour Party are technically a unionist party. They're a massive monarchist party seen today in the Senedd, them paying some nice tributes from the Labour members. So I agree. Times like this, everyone just forgets that sort of thing. But also, we got to remember just the context going into this week, that also we're into a new government now. Will this sort of set the tone for the government going forward? Will we sort of take this as a period, as a break, a breather in politics, and everyone restarts afterwards with the huge issues we got over the winter coming up? We'll see.
We shall see. Tell me at home, by the way, do you think I'm being somewhat deluded in my ambitions of niceness going forward? I hope we can achieve that, but you tell me, do you think I'm being realistic or not? gbviews@gbnews.uk is my email address. David, we were talking just about volume of people paying respects, and we were saying the current Queen Elizabeth II, we estimate around about 750,000 people potentially. We compared that to around 200,000 that went in 2002 for the Queen Mother. But the Queen Mother laid in state for less time. And this is one of the things that I find interesting, the duration for which people do lie in state, because it varies, doesn't it? I'm just going through looking. So the Queen Mother was 3 days, apparently. Winston Churchill, 3 days. Queen Mother, 3 days. King George VI was 5 days. What is the reason for that difference?
The reason is a question of status. In other words, by definition, the sovereign, the late sovereign, must have most. It's also very much a reflection of the times. When George VI died in 1952, transport was very much slower than it is now. Even getting around London was much more difficult. And clearly the longer stretch of time. And what I think you've seen in the events since... I can barely think, it's only last Wednesday. Has been just the incredible pace of events. The progress of the British Isles would be, of course, impossible without air travel. And we've seen everything accelerate. And similarly, the scale of the preparations in the sense of the organisation for the queue and so on. On the other hand, some aspects of it are very much smaller.
Yeah,
if you actually, because of the fact we've far fewer troops than we used to. I mean, if you go back, not so much, I don't have the figures at my fingertips, surprise, surprise, for George VI's funeral, but for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth, do you know how many troops were on the streets of London?
I do not, but I suspect you do.
40,000.
40,000.
That is half the complete complement of the current British Army. That gives you... So we'll see... So in other words, the times also play a part in this and the resources available.
Yeah, tell me at home, by the way, have you been to see the Queen lying in state? Are you going to see? There was news today, wasn't there, as well, about the very unpleasant news, should I say, about the 2 police officers that were stabbed in London earlier this morning. I think it was around 6 o'clock this morning. Obviously, our thoughts are with those people. And this is one of the challenges. Some people have never been to London, Jack. They don't have any desire, quite frankly, I don't mean to be rude, but they don't have any desire to come to London. And one of the reasons is they hear about things like these stabbings, very unfortunate events, and it puts them off coming. And I hope it hasn't put anyone off that was potentially planning to come this weekend. And you see news like that and you think, oh, no, I'll stay away.
Yeah, but a stabbing at any time is particularly horrendous. But obviously, with the situation we find ourselves in the past 10 days, past week, it's going to hit the headlines even harder. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a massive deterrent to a lot of people. And going by the numbers you and David were discussing earlier, the 750,000 doesn't seem like it's deterred a lot of people. Bearing in mind all these people are also hearing about the length of the queues, and the number's still that high.
Yeah.
But having said that, yeah, it's not good sort of publicity for the city. But, there's going to be a lot of police officers out there doing hard work over these 10 days, along with a lot of the military who I've, just walking around, you see them everywhere at the moment. So, rest of it, I think everyone is safe. But
the queue, for heaven's sake, must be the safest place to be. I mean, if the only place that will actually be safer is Westminster Hall. I mean, if you actually, thinking about it, the degree of security and everything else. The one thing I don't think we've been quite getting, and I think we should emphasise for those who are thinking of coming, is the extraordinary contrast between the queue and the people's behaviour in Westminster Hall.
Yeah.
I mean, that place, that space, the volume, the history, the sheer impressiveness of the catafalque, the soldiers standing guard and so on. Whatever was going on outside, you can even, just looking at it here, you can
sense the change.
A sense of change,
Yeah.
a silence,
Yeah,
a
absolutely.
seriousness
Yeah.
in the thing.
Because that, I guess, is when it comes
course.
real. That's when you are literally presented with the very reason why you're there. And I have to say, I am an avid people watcher, and I really could sit and watch this live stream of people all day long, quite frankly. I find it absolutely fascinating. I really do, just to see how people react, how people respond. I love to see people who've taken their children there as well, because this is something that those children will learn about in school for years and years and years to come. So there you go, that's what's happening and has been happening in London as we speak and today. But over in Wales, King Charles III has spent much of the day there. He addressed the Senate in Welsh and then greeted crowds in Cardiff in his first visit to the country since he became monarch. Our reporter, Jeff Moody, has been in Cardiff and remains there now. I think he's available for us to speak to. Yeah, Jeff, hello. Tell us what's been happening there.
Well, Operation Springtide is now officially at an end. That's when the King goes to all corners of his kingdom to meet officials, dignitaries and the public, first of all in Edinburgh, then in Belfast, London obviously, and today here in Cardiff. It's been a huge day for the people of Cardiff. They were gathered in the streets like I've never seen before, 10, 20 deep, huge crowds, all hoping for a glimpse of their king. All the school children were out with their Wales flags waving madly, and inside the grounds of the castle, really quite a festival atmosphere, really. When the king came out, he went into a reception for about an hour. In that reception, he met all sorts of people from different charities, including the Aberfan Wives charity, which they were saying to me, the Queen Consort said to them this afternoon, "Oh, the king really, really wants me to meet you. He's been talking about you all day." So a little connection there. But after they came out, they were greeting the crowds. They did a lovely little walkabout. The king in a slight hurry to get in his car. The Queen Camilla was left holding all the flowers and the gifts and chatting to people while the king went to his car slightly impatiently, I did think. But that's the nature of the beast. It's a very difficult, busy few days for him. Plenty more engagements to come. The Welsh flag is now at half staff over the castle. It was the royal standard earlier on that was raised to full staff as the king came into his castle, and then the Welsh flag put back to half staff after he left. And that's the very nature of this, isn't it? This week we've yo-yoed from grief to jubilation at the new king. It's almost like Boris Johnson said, waves of grief. And this is a coordinated, organised system, isn't it? That one moment we're grieving and then the next moment we're celebrating. The Queen has died, long live the King. Well, now this part is over and done with. Operation Springtide is done. It's a chance for the King to rest a little bit, to reflect over the weekend, to have some private time, we hope, before the massive, tumultuous and hugely emotional events on Monday.
That's Jeff Moody there. Jack, you are yourself Welsh?
Yes, very Welsh, not far from Cardiff actually, so we know them scenes very well.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw lots of really nice footage as well of the King and Queen Consort out meeting people, and they seem to have got a really warm reception and welcome there. What do you think it means to the people of Wales?
But firstly, I'm not surprised at all. Like, Wales is probably one of the most monarchist and unionist part of the whole of the United Kingdom. Honestly, I honestly mean that. Sometimes Wales gets negative headlines for a few polls, which will show different ratings of things going up. But you know, the scenes we've seen today, I'm completely not surprised by. But in regards to what this means for Wales, I think at the moment, and it's going to take maybe a few weeks for sort of this to all unfold when we get past the sort of mourning period. But I really think this is hugely significant for Wales, just because. And David, do correct me if any of my sort of factualness is inaccurate here. But this is the new monarch is the longest serving Prince of Wales in history, and this is someone who has spent the past when he was given the Prince of Wales title, he was very young, but say past 40 years in Wales every year, week tours in Wales. He bought a house in Wales only about 2006, I think it was, when he didn't have to. He loves Wales. He knows it well. He knows the different complexities across the nation. So it's really exciting from that perspective. Someone who really understands Wales, gets it and loves it. But also by giving Prince William and Princess Kate now the Prince of Wales and Princess of Wales titles. I also think that this is a hugely sort of a huge moment in the whole transition, really, because here we've got the royal couple who are, after the Queen, all polls show are the most popular royals across the country, across the globe. Really, they're one of the most recognised couples across the world. They've also lived in Wales for 3 years. They started their family in Wales. These again, we got a Prince of Wales now who is already very familiar with the country. He loves it. He supports Wales in the rugby. So it's the future in regards to the Royals and Wales is quite bright.
Just before I bring David in, I just want to put something to you, Jack, because you say, people are very welcoming, happy, especially about the new holders of the title, Prince of Wales, etc. There's a petition that's getting a little bit of traction, and it says that the title, so the Prince of Wales, remains an insult to Wales, is a symbol of historical oppression. It's saying that the title implies Wales is a principality undermining Wales, Wales's status as a nation and as a country. It says that the title has no constitutional role for Wales because they see it as a devolved country with a national parliament. What do you say to that?
By the way, I should caveat, obviously, being Welsh doesn't give me the sort of, the monopoly on the voice of everyone in Wales. Of course, and there's people across the United Kingdom who will disagree with my view, especially across Wales. But just on this petition, I've been looking at this. This petition's been up for a week, I think, touch or go. I was looking at the figures not long before we came on. I think it was on roughly 28,000. This is less than 1% of the Welsh population. This is a fraction of the Welsh population. I just don't think the narrative should be set by, just such a small group. This tends to happen with Wales because Wales often gets sort of compared a lot to Scotland. Scotland with a lot more sort of nationalist and independence movement, much stronger in Scotland. So in Wales, you get small movements in the margins of polls and stuff, and it creates a huge headline. But it's just not reflective of the whole country. You saw the turnout today for when the King was there with the Queen's consort. It's a fantastic reception. It's very... And this is consistent, by the way. It's not just this particular poll, this particular sort of petition, rather. Polls going back over the years have been pretty consistent that Wales is, for the majority, very in support of the royal family.
Yeah, and David, I find the title of Prince of Wales quite a fascinating one because we just touched there briefly on some of the history. But Prince of Wales, Princess of Wales, it has had a lot of controversy surrounding the people that have held it, not necessarily the title, but the people that have held it. It's now moved over to William. What's your thoughts on it?
I think the really important thing is to say that those 28,000 do have a point. Wales was conquered. Unlike Scotland, which was never conquered by England, save under Cromwell and briefly, Wales was conquered absolutely by Edward I in the 13th century, and the magnificent castles. We saw one of them, the castle of Carnarvon, where the Prince of Wales, the now King, was invested as Prince of Wales. These are the deliberate monuments of an imperial conquest. There was also a very serious attempt under Henry VIII to Anglicise Wales. For a period of time, the Welsh language was illegal. There was a deliberate incorporation of Wales into the system of English shires and giving Wales again, which long before Scotland, which only happens after Union, giving Wales representation in the British Parliament, in the English Parliament. Similarly, all the Welsh bishops were directly under the Archbishop of Canterbury. Even in the Middle Ages, there was no separate Church of Wales. So that's... I'm a great believer that give your enemies credit when they're speaking the truth. They're speaking a truth there. What then happens, of course, is, first of all, very important sections of the Welsh and incorporate themselves into England and become extremely important in English politics and benefit from it. And then, of course, all sorts of layers come on top. Now, let's go back to your Princes of Wales. The title, remember, again, there's nothing abusive about calling it Princes of Wales. Wales, unlike Scotland, was never a separate organised state. There was never a separate Kingdom of Wales. There were one or two important Princes of Wales, but there was never an organised system of government. There was never a Welsh Parliament. There was never a Welsh administration. You see, it's very, very... In other words, the comparison with Scotland, which is what is running through everything that Jack was saying, does not apply. Scotland is a genuine, separate history, a separate kingdom, a separate church. Even when it's Catholic, it's got its own organisation, separate universities, everything. Wales isn't. And the original creation of the title is by the Conqueror, Edward I, for his son, Edward II. And it's the first, if you like, measure of saying to the Welsh, well, actually, we do recognise you're different. And it's very important. It is the title that's given to the heir. Now, that says something very important about the status of Wales within, if you like, this greater Anglo combination of the British Isles. But let's equally put the other side of the story. It's very rare that there's been anything Welsh about Princes of Wales. Let's really face this. There's only one period where there's a serious Welshness, yes. Henry V, when he's Prince of Wales, he's actually born on the borders of Wales. He's born in Monmouth. And then, of course, in the 15th century, and particularly when Henry Tudor, who's got Welsh blood in him, when he becomes king, and when he creates his son, Arthur, Prince of Wales, like so many Princes of Wales not living to take the crown, he is given, very much like Prince Charles, very much as we imagine William will be, he takes up his residence on the borders of Wales in Ludlow. Wales then gets a separate administrative council, but it's based on the borders. But that's a brief flirtation. From that point onwards...
Well, I'm going to test Jack on this at the end to make sure you've been paying attention.
Yeah. I'm giving you your history. From that moment onwards, there is nothing Welsh about the Princes of Wales until the beginning of this century. The beginning of this century, you've got the new Wales of industrialisation, of coal, of the Labour Party, and above all, the Liberal Party, and a Welsh Prime Minister, David Lloyd George. And it's Lloyd George who is really responsible for inventing modern Wales. He pushes, as Chancellor of the Exchequer, as a leading figure in the government of Herbert Asquith, he pushes for the creation of Cardiff as a capital. You will remember, Cardiff has got one of the first imperial capitals. It's built, it looks a bit like Berlin. It looks like Potsdam. It's never finished, but you actually start constructing a capital for Wales. He's the first person who has a Prince of Wales, David, Prince of Wales, the son of George V, actually created at Carnarvon in 1911. And we have the lad's response to it. He was forced to dress up in Tudor costume with ridiculous knickerbockers and mocked by his contemporaries and everything. He hated every single minute of it. And then the next real Prince of Wales is Charles. It is this extraordinary gap.
There was a huge gap, and I'll tell you, you've now got a new Princess of Wales in Catherine, Kate, but the previous one, Diana, was much, much, much loved, wasn't she?
Yes, she was very early in my life. Really, what we're talking about here. But actually, I don't think there's much difference with Catherine. Catherine is extremely popular across the world, across Wales, across the United Kingdom. So I don't think there's much sort of difference there, really. But sorry, Dave, just going back to your point about all this in the history, and I don't, of course, I don't dispute any of this. That was all factual. But what my argument would be to, there was protesters there today saying monarchy's not for me, people signing the petition, would be, I just don't think the Prince of Wales title now is reflective of what it was created to be back then. Now it's more, I see, and I think very practically, the most average person across Wales sees the Prince of Wales as a ambassador for Wales now on the
it
global
has been
stage.
reinvented.
It's reinvented, into the modern, and also, you just go to Prince Charles, King Charles now, but when he became Prince of Wales, this is well documented. The sort of, at the time, nationalism was quite rife in Wales, and definitely there was a bomb plot on his way to the investiture, which the two people doing the bomb, they exploded on themselves. It was very hostile, and it was a very difficult start. And David, you can correct me on this, but I do think that at that time, Charles was lesser known than the current Prince of Wales we've just been taken in. Prince William we're all accustomed to Prince William and Kate. Most of the population has grown up with Prince William. So I think in Wales now, the Prince of Wales Tower, there's going to be a bit of, hopefully, I might be wrong, but I think there may be a change in the dynamic with the new Prince of Wales, who is very, very popular, and more people may see this as a positive thing.
But then Camilla, she actually technically had the title Princess of Wales, didn't she? But didn't tend to refer to it or use it or go by it out of respect for Diana.
Yeah, but that was nothing to do with Wales, and it was not treating Wales with contempt. It was simply because, I mean, let's again face it, the Prince of Wales and Camilla were profoundly unpopular in the wake of the breakup of the marriage. And there was a desperate sense, we mustn't see Camilla, as it were, treading in or trying to fit into Diana's shoes. They were far too big for her. But of course, time has healed. Time has changed in precisely the same way that the time, and particularly the behaviour of the present king, of Charles III, as Prince of Wales, has done everything that Jack was saying, combined, of course, with the fact that the identity of Wales has been given much more formal expression within the British Isles, the devolution, the creation of the Thennet. You see, now look at that. Welsh does not even have a native word for parliamentary assembly. Senate is clearly just Senate, the Latin term. Welsh is a medieval language which lacks, because it's a medieval language and a tongue of poetry, it lacks, as it were, the whole language of modern government. How could it do anything else? Because you never had it. Whereas Scotland had a parliament. Scotland had a chancellor. Scotland had a highly sophisticated separate system of Roman law, none of which applied in Wales.
Fascinating stuff. I've got to say as well, I am actually a quarter Welsh, and shamefully I can't speak a word of Welsh, got to be honest. Just a reminder, in case you're tuning in and thinking to yourself, whose are these voices I can hear if you're listening as opposed to watching us on the studio? A reminder as to who's keeping me company. The voices that you're hearing tonight, historian and broadcaster David Starkey, and also Jack Sellers, who's a former special advisor to the Secretary of State for Wales, and also Boris Johnson. I've been asking you, haven't I, throughout the week, your stories, your memories, your reflections. Lots of you have been getting in contact, telling me your stories about when you've met various royals. Eddie Alcock has been in touch. He has been fortunate enough to meet birth monarchs. Let's listen to his story.
My meeting with Prince Charles and others was when I was chairman of Suffolk County Council in 2010-11. This particular occasion was in Bury St Edmunds, where Prince Charles was there to present medals to troops returning from Afghan. He was introduced to me by Lord Tollymash, who in fact is the High Sheriff, or was the Lord Lieutenant of Suffolk at the time. And beside me was the High Sheriff of Suffolk and other dignitaries from the county. And when he spoke to me, Charles that is, I said to him, "You were in 845 Squadron, I believe." And he said, "My goodness, yes, that is the best squadron of all." Well, then, of course, I said, "Well, my son is in 845 Squadron in charge of helicopter engineering at Yeovilton." Well, then the chat went on and on and on. And because we talked about helicopters and all sorts of stuff. So then Lord Tollymash was probably getting quite disturbed, actually, because I was only second in the queue and there were about 40 still to come. And my later thing, actually more so with the Queen, was when she adorned me with my OBE at Buckingham Palace. And that was in 2014, so a few years later.
There you go. That's one of our viewers there sharing their thoughts, their memories. Now, there are 3 days to go until the funeral of Queen Elizabeth II takes place. It is going to be an absolutely huge event. 500 heads of state and foreign dignitaries from around the world expected to be there. On Monday morning, the state gun carriage of the Royal Navy will carry Her Majesty's coffin from Westminster Hall to Westminster Abbey for the service, which starts at 11 a.m. That is the route that you're seeing on your screen right now, if you're watching. And then a national 2-minute silence will be held at the end of the service just before noon. Later in the day, a smaller service for close family will take place at St George's Chapel next to Windsor Castle. Again, that has been pointed out on the screen if you are watching. It's fair to say it will be history. I keep saying, if I had £1 for every time I said this sentence over this last week, I'd be absolutely minted. But this is literally history in the making, what we're talking about, describing, watching, seeing. A huge, huge event. And there's been a lot of fascination, Jack, around who's been invited, who hasn't been invited. You know, this is 500 statespeople just been mentioning there. I mean, I would dread to think how one even goes around organising such a thing. There's been so many criticisms, comments about people that's been invited and shouldn't have been. And where do you stand on it all?
Well, firstly, yeah, no, I don't envy at all the task the Foreign Office and Cabinet Office, etc., have all got in organising this. There's obviously, you know, this Operation London Bridge is a plan which is in government for years. It's been rolling over, but there's only so much you can plan in advance, and you don't know what the sort of geopolitical tensions are going to be like at the time and who's going to be coming and who's not. The one thing I found quite unusual about the whole thing, maybe David or yourself can clarify this, but it's one thing I can't really get my head around is the bus situation coming from West London, where certain leaders are all going to be on one bus coming over.
It happened at the funeral, sorry, it happened at the wedding. I remember I was covering it for CBS. It happened at the wedding of William and Kate. It was the most extraordinary sight you've ever seen in your life. A kind of Windsor charabang turned up with all the crowned heads in Europe who tumbled out. It was, I mean, I laughed my head off. I was doing my best to be deeply serious.
But why not? Why not? I think it makes perfect sense. You've got a capital city that's got all kinds of road closures. You've got people that are desperate to catch a glimpse of everything.
But these are people who have their own gold coaches, for heaven's sake. Well, and they're forced to sit two abreast in a smelly coach, you know. And
it won't be a smelly coach.
Do they swipe their LT passes?
Well, you know what? Sometimes I think
good for them. You're going to say.
Yeah, I think sometimes people in elevated positions could do with a touch of reality. They could do with being brought down a peg or two, actually, if you ask me. And this ain't going to be like it's not going to be a megabus or anything, is it? They're on.
I am teasing.
No offence to megabus, by the way.
There is something very incongruous about it, and I wonder really whether we shouldn't have gone the whole hog and, as it were, lengthened the procession. I'm sure it would have created yet more security problems. But for after all, you mentioned that unbelievable figure. Can we go back? 500. Now, there has been no event. The Metropolitan Police, in their usual self-aggrandising fashion, were saying it's the biggest police event ever. Forget that. It is the biggest gathering of, as it were, world leaders ever. There has been nothing like this under the British Empire. There's been nothing like this in the Roman Empire. It is unique in scale. And I am just hoping that the sheer scale of the attendance will be clear, will be symbolically clear. I mean, what we saw, I think, in particularly the procession from taking the Queen's body from Buckingham Palace to lie in state was a wonderful sense of the British state symbolically arrayed, doing it. I'm hoping that with the funeral, when, of course, it's not Britain paying respects, it's the world paying respects. I'm just hoping that will be symbolically obvious as well. And I'm not sure buses, however elegant and well cleaned, quite do that.
Yeah, I'm more than happy with it. Tell me at home, by the way, what do you think? Do you think it's a little bit, what do you call low rents, I suppose, is what we'd say? Do you think that these people deserve better? I don't. I think it's perfectly acceptable. I think it's quite a good idea, quite frankly. Although I suspect a few of those on the bus might not agree with me. They might not want to be on that bus. But where do you stand on that?
I find the... Sorry to just jump on this point, but I just find the difference in service that different leaders are getting, probably the tricky bit. You know, President Biden's been told that he'll get his full sort of cascade of cars as he's used to, but the Emperor of Japan, for example, is meant to be on this bus. Yeah. You know, I wouldn't have liked to be the person to be telling the Emperor of Japan that was the case.
But again, you see, look at the funeral. We've been talking about earlier state funerals. Look at the funeral of Edward VII, which is the most extraordinary. This is before Europe is divided and wrecked by the First World Wars. There were 9 kings and an emperor riding behind the coffin. Now, that as a symbol is completely... Oh, and by the way, his dog.
Someone's emailed in.
Caesar.
You mentioned this, I'll tell you very quickly, because someone's emailed in, where is it? And
said, Caesar.
Jackie, Michelle, can you ask David Starkey to tell us again about George VII, she says, and his funeral, featuring his favourite dog, Caesar. She says she's heard this story, she loved it, she looked up the photos and videos and she wants to hear it again. So go on briefly then.
She wants to hear it again. It was a wire-haired Yorkshire Terrier. It was a naughty dog, as these kind of dogs always are. It was profoundly indulged by Edward VII, who didn't indulge anybody else apart from himself. The dog was fond of nibbling the trousers of dignitaries as the king laughed its head off. It was heartbroken when he died. It sort of moaned outside the royal bedroom. It managed to get in at one point under the bed and had to be dragged out by the Queen Dowager, by Queen Alexandra. And at the funeral, it walked immediately behind his coffin with a footman, ahead of the German emperor, of course, who is very striking, isn't it? He was Victoria's eldest grandson, and he actually led the mourners at the man who would fight Britain, led the mourners at Edward VII's funeral, which is only 4 years before the outbreak of the First World War. And the German emperor was exceedingly pompous and deeply disapproved of the dog taking precedence of him. And the dog then retires to the life of Riley at Marlborough House and is buried there with a rather pretty tombstone with his photograph. And Edward VII, who loved luxury objects, also had a model of him made by Fabergé out of precious stones and gems.
Well,
so,
there you go.
What a dog's life.
What a dog's life. That story there told, Jackie, just for you. And I tell you what, Jack, I can't imagine the seating plans. You know, imagine the logistics and the thought process that you have to put into who sits where, who doesn't get on with who do you need to separate from who. That alone would be too much for me.
Yeah, well, if there's one thing I've known from my experience of working with politicians at all levels, is that, you know, every politician has an ego as well. So there's going to be fighting over who gets closest to the front. And, you know, yeah, like you said, the sort of geopolitical tensions they've got to balance in as well. I don't envy the job of the people organising this. I imagine there'll be some moving around on the day. I imagine they'll keep it a little bit flexible. But it doesn't take away from the fact of, as David said, as you touched upon, the size, the scale of this, how many leaders from around the world. It's really, really significant, and it's a massive part of history which we're all witnessing.
Indeed, indeed it is. And gosh, what a week it's been. In some ways, it feels like it's flown by. In other weeks, it feels like it's been an incredibly long time. But that is it from me for tonight. We'll be back on Monday, of course, paying special attention to that funeral. But for now, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. Lots of people getting in touch to say thank you. Just had someone here saying that they've learnt more about Wales, is Russell. I've learnt more in the last 10 minutes about Scotland and Wales than I did in all of my 60 years life and all my schooling. Thanks, says Ross. Ross, you need to pay better attention at school. I'm going to quiz you all on Monday to see how much of what you've learned you've remembered over the weekend. If you're anything like me, you probably will have forgotten it all. We'll do a test.
Shame.
I know. Well, I don't know where your memory, I tell you, it puts mine to shame, so it does. Anyway, I'm told off because I need to move on. Thanks again, everyone, and over to Patrick.
Yes, indeed, Michelle. Look, thank you very, very much. Great to listen to all of that. And I'm not looking forward to the idea of being quizzed, but of course, it's a very different edition of Friday Night Feast this week for obvious reasons. It's going to have a more sombre and a more solemn tone. We are going to be going live to the vigil, which we're expecting the Queen's children to pay their respects by standing vigil at Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's coffin. But we have managed to work in a couple of other little bits and bobs as well. We've got the Pearly King and Queen coming in live in the studio. We're going to be doing much, much more on top of that as well. Also, did you know that apparently the Queen was a big fan of the Nintendo Wii? So we've got a tech expert on that to talk about how technology had changed through the Queen's reign. All of that and much, much more. It'll be solemn, it'll be sombre, but, you know, we might have a couple of little laughs along the way as well if you're lucky. It is Friday night after all. But up next, it's You Weather.
Hello. The showers that some places saw through the day will ease overnight, leading to clear skies and a chilly feel as we start off Saturday. But actually, for many, Saturday is looking like a largely dry and sunny day. High pressure is moving in. As it does so, we'll see the winds easing and the shower activity easing, but we've still got this brisk breeze around the eastern flank of that high, and as a result, we'll still see some further showers into the north of Scotland and North Sea coasts of England through the night.